Morning, everyone. Happy Football Day, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today, first time in a long time, I'm being joined by the Mirror's online executive editor, Anne Gripper. Morning, Anne.
Morning, Susie.
And we're going to take you through the biggest stories today. We want you to get into the comments, ask us your questions, ask us whatever's burning a hole in your head, and we do our best to answer them. We can't answer them all, but we will answer the best ones. So what have we got today? Well, the Mirror is splashing on some sort of football match that's taking place later on. We're not going to discuss it at length because there's not anything to explain about it, and it's not really news because it hasn't happened yet. But Anne, something offside, blah blah.
I think you can probably tell which of the two of us is more excited about this. I've dug out my shirt from 2007 when the Mirror's women's football team from the features team, we played. Get my camera right. We played the England women's team. We got absolutely stumped. 15 now. I mean, it was
absolutely walloped.
So we got to play against Alex Scott and Eni Aluko, who are both doing punditry work during the Euros, and Rachel Yankee, who's an absolute legend. So that was great fun. But I suspect that Gareth Southgate and the England team tonight will not be losing 15-0. And I think it's fair to say, I mean, there's a massive moment. It happened 3 years ago at the World Cup as well. But everyone's a little bit in love with Gareth Southgate, and that is just very much the men who are just wondering what would Gareth do in any particular situation. Because
he's taking his waistcoat off. That's all I've noticed.
His tie looks a bit knitted this time, which I think is an interesting look. But anyway, I think what was once the impossible job, he seems to have made it seem almost enjoyable and fun. And the players who, previous iterations of the England squads maybe didn't really like to turn up and play for England, whether they were worried or scared or under pressure. You used to get people sort of pulling out quite a lot, or little niggly injuries, and they would first sign of getting out, they potentially would. But this team, they actually seem to really enjoy playing together. They can actually play in different formations, which is not something that England traditionally has been renowned for being flexible with. And I don't know, I'm not necessarily saying we're going to win, because you always kind of get your hopes up and then have them dashed. But I almost don't actually mind, weirdly, because they're we know that they are trying, they're doing their best. It doesn't feel like they will.
That's so English. It's taking part of the count.
But the best thing, though, have you seen the Kasper Schmeichel clip? So the Danish... He's the Danish goalkeeper, Susie. He is the son of the legend who is Peter Schmeichel. He's already had a good season, having won the FA Cup final with Leicester City. He's a tremendous player, and has sort of dealt. He's dealt with a lot, both at Leicester, where they obviously had the horrible tragedy a few years ago with the owner dying in the helicopter crash, and then Denmark this time around, their first match at the tournament, one of their star players had a cardiac arrest on the pitch. So
I noticed that. Yeah, that was news.
that was definitely news. And the brilliant news, obviously, being that he is making a good recovery, and long may that continue. And his sort of team were incredible around him. But anyway, Kasper Schmeichel was one of the people speaking at the press conference yesterday, and one of the journalists asked him, how do you feel about stopping football coming home? Has football ever been home? Just totally deadpanned it. It was just like total epic trolling of the legendary.
We should remind people that sarcasm was introduced to this country by the Vikings. We learned it from them, and they are better at it. Now, I don't care who wins tonight because I'm part Danish, so I win either way. But besides which, we all know they're going to choke on penalties, so
not going to go that far. We don't need the penalties. They've not let any ball in so far. Fingers crossed. Right, come on, everybody, and whoever you're supporting, have a good night and play nicely with everybody.
Up the Danes. Now, some actual news, and Boris Johnson's announcement that masks can come off if you want, but not yet, on July the 19th, except in some places, and only if you feel like it. But it's entirely up to you if you live or die at this point. And it's led to entirely predictable mask mayhem, with people whipping them off early, as you can see on that photograph of the tube there. People with them on, people with them under the chins, people with them off, restarting their own shielding, or just generally railing at the incompetence of a man who is to common sense as I am to taking a corner in football, which is to say a complete stranger. Now, Anne, I want you to take some personal responsibility for this. Tell us exactly what's going on. Are people listening to this buffoon or not?
So in some ways, I actually don't think a lot will change. The people who are anti-masks and not prepared to wear them were probably already not prepared to wear them and ignoring the rules in a lot of situations and just being cavalier. I think a lot of people also still haven't cottoned on to, you're not wearing a mask to protect yourself, you're wearing a mask to stop you potentially infecting other people, and also as a sort of sign of visual reassurance. So, you know, I've had one jab. Yes, there's lots of people who've had 2 jabs now. There are still probably quite a lot of people who've not had any jabs just yet, you know, and there's rising cases among young people as they're still doing the vaccine rollout. So there are still a lot of people who haven't got that protection, and people can, you know, with the new variant, we're seeing that people can still get infected, albeit not as seriously ill, despite being vaccinated. So there's a few different things going on. I mean, we did a poll on the Mirror website to see what people thought, and generally people were very wary about all of the restrictions being lifted, and only 17% of people who replied, I think it's about 5,000 replies in very short order, saying, you know, yes, they would stop wearing masks in all situations, stop wearing them completely. Most people, I think it was about 59%, said that they would carry on wearing masks in the situations that they wear them at the moment. And then about 24% said they would carry on wearing masks but be less strict about them. I mean, I think, as ever, Chris Whitty spoke the most sense, I think, on Monday night at the press conference, of laying out the situations in which he would wear a mask, you know, emphasis on indoors and if it's crowded, but also as a courtesy to other people. So if someone else is in a position where they feel uncomfortable, or he would feel like he might make somebody uncomfortable, then he would wear a mask then. So it is about personal responsibility, and it is about caring about other people, but it's, you know,
yeah, it's responsibility for other people. It's taking some responsibility for someone else, which plays into all our culture wars. And Nicholas says there, I should keep wearing mine. It's no hardship for me. I'm still free. It's not bothersome. It doesn't hurt you to wear a mask, but it's the idea that someone else's well-being can in some way be something that you can affect. That plays into Brexit. It plays into refugee and asylum seeker issues. It plays into voting left or right. All this stuff, there's some really clear Venn diagrams of people who wear masks and people who don't wear masks, and what else you can say about them as a result. And we are going to have a lot of, I think you're going to have some, you know, I live in a couple of villages out in the country. Sarah there still wears a mask. And I can see, you know, in village shops, which aren't very well ventilated, people saying, well, I can go in here now without a mask on. And people in those shops with perhaps elderly, vulnerable customers are going to say, actually, we'd like you to wear a mask when you come in, even though it's not the law. And then there's going to be arguments and there's going to be rows.
And I think the other thing you've got the people who are working in particular situations, whether that's, you know, driving buses or in supermarkets or shops or the little village shops that you're talking about. They're in their workspace. They kind of don't have a choice or as much control. And then you've got the challenge of, okay, what are the travel companies going to do? What are the supermarkets going to do? Because
what are the metro mayors going to do? Because they run 40% of Britain.
And you're going onto their premises, you're going onto their train, you're going onto the tube. It's their rules that you have to follow to have that sort of right of entry, if you like. But it will be much harder, I would imagine, for them to then enforce the rules if it is just a sort of a train rule or a supermarket rule rather than the law. And that's not me saying that this absolutely needs to stay the law. I think it's just that the having a degree of clarity from the top down, not really something we're necessarily used to. So possibly I'm being a bit over optimistic, expecting that we might get that from Mr. Johnson and his government. But the you know, it would, for me, like going on the idea of going on the tube now, like that is not just poorly ventilated. It's like underground in a little tunnel, and being on there without masks, it feels weird. And it is also just that thing. We've been living in such a different way for so long that
it would take a long time. If they said no one wear a mask tomorrow, it would take a long time for all of us to catch up with that idea, because we've felt so long feeling that we're under threat in some way. Now, I've had people commenting there saying, oh, my freedom back. Others saying, most of them, the majority saying, I'm going to keep wearing my masks. It's not a problem. But we need to remember as well, people were wearing masks before they were mandated by the government because people felt that that's what they needed to do. And the government had to catch up with people. And here they seem to be trying to get ahead of people. It's never been law. It's been a guidance. Get it right. There's been a number of laws and a number of bits of guidance. And the law is mostly about social distancing, which is the bit that's going to change. And that's the thing which I think one person was remarking upon is supposed to be the government thinks that's going to affect the economy because the social distancing rules means that businesses, hospitality, cinemas, theatres can't get as many people in if they have to obey the social distancing law, which of course Matt Hancock helped write, signed into law and then ignored. I don't know, who is he? He's hiding with his girlfriend somewhere. Now, Mike said, Johnson's turned into another cultural battle. It's a matter of weeks before images of anti-maskers mocking or worse, mask wearers on the tube. Someone was sending around on Twitter yesterday some footage, not footage, but some reports from 1918 and the people who are complaining about having to wear a mask during the Spanish flu pandemic, which killed millions. And having a bonfire of masks when the restrictions ended. So not much has changed under the sun, really.
It is that kind of culture, and it's a very visual thing. You know, you make a judgment looking at people. You know, you can judge people when you see them. Anyway, you get that first impression of somebody's face. Are they smiling at you? Are they looking grumpy or whatever? So yes, we've missed out on that. But now we're going to see, okay, what do people think of themselves? What do they think of other people potentially when they're wearing a mask or not? And certainly in America, it's sort of been described as an even more divisive than it is here, where basically if you're a Republican Trump supporter, you don't wear a mask, no way, no how, anywhere. Whereas if you're a Democrat, you might be out in the middle of the desert on your own and you're still wearing a mask. So it's sort of very extreme sides of things. And
yeah, Anne-Marie says, me and my family wore a mask right from the beginning of this terrible pandemic, ever before the government made it mandatory, and we will continue to do so. There's an awful lot of people not only just concerned about their health, but there's those who are elderly, those who are frail, those who've got underlying health conditions. I've got epilepsy and I'm in category 6 and a higher priority group before getting the vaccine, which is why I'm double jabbed, although obviously not being a day over your age, Anne. But there are people who are going to continue to feel cautious for a long, long, long time. And when other people who feel less cautious take their masks off, what you're doing is making those people feel scared. So if you think that's all right because you want your freedom to take your mask off, you're taking the freedom from someone who is more vulnerable than you are. And that's the nub of it, whether you care about that or not. Kim says...
I think Kim's got a point saying that I think we should just get on with our lives now. We can't keep going into lockdown. It's not going away. You know, we are going to have to learn to live with the virus and get back to a more normal life. But I guess it's just the sort of the degree of how quickly we go there and get there. And the concern at the moment is if you've got a higher number of cases circulating, then that means the virus is replicating itself more. And it's not necessarily very good at making exact copies. And every time you make a copy of something, a little error might slip in. And with a virus, that's how you get to the variants, essentially. And the hope is, you know, touch wood, so far the vaccinations seem to be successful against the other variants that have been coming up. But the underlying concern essentially is that if a variant comes up that the vaccine can't handle, then where does that leave us then?
Exactly. As Nicola here raises a point I want to talk about next. What about the vulnerable children? Have they been forgotten? My grandson's very high risk, and I find this next move very selfish. Now, in that spread there, in the small print, as it were, Sage are warning that there will be more restrictions coming this autumn. Chris Whitty, who probably should be wearing a mask when he goes out in public, and maybe a wig as well, so he doesn't get beaten up, is warning about long COVID in children, and that there will be many, many more increased cases of that if you're letting infections sort of run riot a bit. And Boris Johnson has finally admitted these freedoms might be reversible, although he's obviously said it in the small print, of course. Now, and our colleague Polly Hudson's column today quotes a paediatrician, a guy called Dr. Greg Kelly, who says, I'm going to read it out, "I'm going on record saying that allowing kids to be freely infected with a novel disease that has unknown long-term consequences is the worst idea of 2021, despite being a pretty crowded field so far." Now, and Tom says there, how do you get back to normality if you let the variants run amok? Now, they're saying that this kind of the strategy, if you like, of letting the infections now rise to the level of perhaps 100,000 a day or more, letting the healthier people get infected, is actually going to be creating, it doesn't help us get back to normal, because it's going to create the perfect storm, the perfect opportunity for more variants to arise. Because as you said, every time it replicates, you run the risk of a whole fresh new variant, and that will get around our vaccines potentially and cause us other problems in the long run. So that the plan to let healthier people get it steadily over the summer to avoid a big explosion that would get the NHS in the autumn, having this rumble instead that the NHS can cope with, is that going to work? Is this going to? It doesn't feel like a brilliant idea to me. Just
it feels very uncomfortable. But what looking at the graphs that were on display in the press conference on Monday, seeing the spike rising in daily cases, and you look at the sort of the lumps and bumps over the previous months, and you're seeing this is heading up back towards where it was when things were really bad in the early part of the year, as we were sort of deep in lockdown and the full-fledged sort of harsh winter second wave. So that was going right up, and you're like, oh goodness, this is really bad. And then the hospitalizations line was very, very flat. And that link of, the vaccinations happening does seem to be, touch wood, hopefully, fingers crossed, breaking that link between the sort of the most serious levels of illness that are going to require high levels of hospital treatment. There clearly are still people who do need that really serious intervention. And there are still people dying, and
younger people as well.
Absolutely. And every death through this whole situation has been a tragedy, but you can imagine as well that people who are dying at this stage, when it feels like you're coming towards the end of it and you thought that things were going to be okay, it's almost, it's a different time. This is not a war, but people who died right in the sort of final days of the First World War or the Second World War and never knew that peace was just nearly quite there and just didn't quite make it, if you like. And so the people who are dying now, that's hard. And then it's going to be, they're not saying essentially how many extra deaths they're prepared to take, what the potential impact of this unlocking is going to be, and what the impact of that will be, and what the level of risk is with the deaths. But I'm sure they'll be keeping a close eye on the graphs. We'll have to see how it goes. But
Sean says, are the masks going? Pay attention, Sean. I've been doing this 20 minutes so far. Thanks for popping in. Yes, they're going, but not if you don't want to, in short, and probably coming back again, because it seems that the Prime Minister has overruled SAGE in order to impose these freedoms, in order to bring in these freedoms. What mindset am I in? And Nicola says, it's so wrong, the vulnerable have been forgotten. While I want and like a little normality, I don't like the thought of no masks. It's going to be up to us. I think people are going to carry on doing it because most people have realised that Boris Johnson's not really got the common sense. That's all right, Sean. Thanks for popping in. Boris Johnson's not got the common sense really to, I don't know, raise children properly or even know how many he's got. So I'm going to talk about another story, though. To keep asking us your questions, what do you stand on masks? Do you think it's right that we should be taking them off? Are you concerned? Are you going to keep wearing them? Do you think the restrictions are going to come back in the autumn and the winter? The scientists seem to be saying that restrictions may be necessary every winter for 5 years or more. And it's the kind of news that politicians don't like giving us. So, because that would be the entirety of Boris Johnson's term as Prime Minister. Now, there is some other stories going on in the world, though, and no, it's still not football. The reversal of a £20 uplift to universal credit might not seem like very good news. This was a 20 quid extra that was brought in for the poorest people in society because of the pandemic. Now, but the Mirror is reporting on page 2 today that according to some Labour research, it might turn out to be an act of self-harm for the Tories. Now, and it seems that a lot of them have universal credit claimants in their constituencies, and they've got more people who are on universal credit who are their personal voters than they do have the majority in their constituencies. So who is at risk of losing their seat, do you think?
Well, there's various Tory majorities around the country that aren't quite as large as perhaps they could be. But reading, this is Ben Glaze, Deputy Political Editor, his story on page 2. Maybe just around the corner. He's the names that were picked out. Boris Johnson's Uxbridge and South Ruislip constituency. So he has a majority of 7,210, but in the constituency, Labour say there are 9,677 claimants. So that's a difference of 2,467. So, in theory, depending on how people voted previously, if they voted previously, they could switch. They could flip the seat, and there's obviously various other things. I mean, Dominic Raab, who had a close run thing in Esher and Walton last time around, he has got a majority of 2,743, which, while not tiny, is not very comfortable. I mean, it's more than the victory for Labour in Batley and Spen last week, but it's not. It's not as much as a senior Tory would hope to have. I would.
No, perhaps 116 Tory MPs. There's the story. We don't have it to show up on the screen, I'm afraid. There's a story for you. 116 Tories who may be at risk of losing their seats, but only if you think that universal credit claimants vote, and only if you think they previously voted Tory. So if you think they voted Labour or they didn't bother voting at all, then it's not so much of the good news that Labour might think it is. But not that we're dissing Ben's story, because Ben's brilliant. Now, before we get on to anything else, we want to talk very quickly about some good news. Now, keep asking us your questions before we wind up the show at past. What do you think about masks? What do you think about universal credit? Are you got any problems with masks coming off? Are you having a bonfire for yours? Let us know. Get into the comments and we'll ask the best ones. Now,
I'd also like to know what kind of masks people have. I have a Cornish flag mask, which is my favourite.
Yes, well, I have a friend of mine who runs a little embroidery business has got me a purple mask with my logo on here.
Excellent.
So I've got a cloth one. I've got a red one and I've got a purple one, and I'm very happy with them. And I'm going to keep wearing them if I ever have to go on the tube again and have my face in someone else's armpit, regardless of pandemic, just because it's someone else's armpit.
Block the smell as well as the corona germs.
Exactly. Now, we do have some good news for you, and here it is. Whisper it, but Britney may be about to be freed. Now, Britney Spears may have failed to overturn her conservatorship in a court hearing the other day, but her powerful and emotional testimony to the court may have actually done her some good. Not only has the financial trust, which administers half her conservatorship, resigned in shame and said, we're not having any part of this anymore. But now the man who has managed her career since she was 13, Larry Rudolph, the man who apparently masterminded all the Hit Me Baby One More Time and everything since then, has thrown in the towel as well. Now, Anne, he's resigned, but why?
Well, Britney has said that she intends to retire, so he thinks that it's in her best interest that he resign. She essentially doesn't need his services anymore, but also presumably it's partly because of this incredible testimony that she gave, and he would not want to be associated, you would imagine, with what happened. And that whole thing is sort of fairly toxic, really, to borrow the title of a Britney song. But
I see what you did there.
I know. I know it's only 9:30, but I'm on it.
There's no suggestion that Larry Rudolph was involved in any of the stuff that Britney was talking about, but she specified being forced to have contraception, being forced to work, forced to dance, having lots of controlling behaviour about what she wore and who she saw, not being able to marry the person she wants to marry, so on and so forth, all very Handmaid's Tale. And although this guy's written a letter of resignation, which is quite public, which makes it clear that there's no point in him managing someone who doesn't want to work anymore. But he has managed her since the age of 13. He must have known what was going on, even if he wasn't involved in it. He must have seen this happening to someone from a very young age.
I just find the whole idea of the conservatorship so strange, particularly, for a country like America. I mean, literally the final sort of banging line that you hear when they're belting out Star Spangled Banner is the land of the free. And Britney is not free. There's a reason it's a hashtag Free Britney is the sort of the campaign behind it. And to have, we all remember her sort of bursting on the scene and Hit Me Baby One More. It's iconic of the 90s and some brilliant songs, brilliant performances. Clearly she had her breakdown and she had issues. But the idea that still now, this far onward, that someone has that level of control over her life and she's not free to try and make her own journey forward and refine her own path with support rather than control. It's incredibly sad.
It's like medieval. It's the concept of ownership of a woman, that someone else has a right to make money out of her. It used to be that your father owned you and your virginity and then made money out of selling you to your husband at some point. And here we have Britney just not even able to decide what clothes she's putting on, which is pretty grim. But it goes to show, and this is the good news, this goes to what I've always said, which is when people are denied proper justice in a court of law, and there are many celebrities I'm not going to name here who have walked out of court having been guilty of sin, but they then, their accusers do then get to go into the court of public opinion, which is what newspapers can do. And the concept of public shame, of being attached to something like this, even if you're not personally involved, as we do not know Larry Rudolph was, I should repeat, that the court of public opinion is often enough to do what actual courts won't. So well done, Britney.
Next hearing is on July the 14th. So fingers crossed.
Next week. Well, okay, fingers crossed, Britney, and you can do it. Put your foot down and see what happens. We're all backing you. Now, thank you for joining us, everybody. Thank you for joining us, Anne. Apparently, there's no more comments because everyone's just having arguments about masks. So go off and wear your masks as and when you want to.
Not yet. But
on July the 19th, despite what Boris Johnson says, and enjoy the match tonight. If you're not watching it, as I won't be, then come and join me watching The Walking Dead from the start on Disney Plus, because that's what I'll be doing. And up the Danes. Thank you, everybody.
Come on, England.
See you next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. God, what